Hey everybody, we are live, and as you're going to notice, you have no picture of me. For some reason, my webcam decided to not be working today, so you get to see the beautiful S logo until I turn it over to Greg. So lucky you guys. Um, Anyway, hey, I'm Mark behind the microphone here, and just pretend you're listening to the radio. And I am coming to you from beautiful, sunny Redlands, California, from a nice little co-working space called the Orange Space, which is a great place to come. It's great for community. It's great to meet people, and it's a great place to come and work. What I really like about it is that they have all the bandwidth I need in order to do what I need to do. So
There's a lot of
anyway.
great restaurants around you too. That's
And
pretty cool.
and there are some good restaurants. Now, me being the joyless vegan that I am, I can't eat at any of them, but
Yeah.
there are a lot of really good restaurants around here, I hear. Actually, there is one good. There's a new place called Plant Power down the street, which is
Yeah.
actually pretty good. So if textured vegetable protein is your thing, or black bean burgers are your thing, or they even have a lot of raw options, yeah, Plant Power is pretty cool. So yeah, that's one place that I will go to. And then there's Augie's Coffee down the street, which is what I need in order to be able to bring my charming personality to all of you out there in the WordPress world. So
I was pretty impressed with Plant Power. You took me there, and
yeah,
it was good. I thought
yeah,
it was pretty good.
and
I'm not vegan at all, and I still
yeah, it
thought it was
was.
quite good.
You're not even slightly vegan.
Not even slightly vegan.
Yeah, not only is Greg not slightly vegan, but he likes his sweets. So if you guys ever want to make points with
Oh
Greg,
man.
send him sweets, and he'll be your friend for life. So
I've actually a client has actually given me cookies.
yeah,
At one who brought them to a
that's
WordCamp.
right. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's two ways you can make points with Greg. One is to buy either premium memberships to Desktop Server or WP SiteSync, or give him suites. Those are okay. So that's three ways. Anyway, so how are you doing today, Greg?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
Good. Obviously, I've had my Augie's coffee today.
I
So
see.
just a few little things out to get out of the way here. Of course, the standard things which are already in the chat screen here on YouTube. Please, if you're going to take part in the online chat on YouTube, be civil and respectful. Remember that we are human beings here. We're all part of a community, and we have feelings and things like that. So try to be respectful as much as possible. Be helpful. There are definitely always going to be things that some people know that others don't. So remember, we all didn't know things at one point in time. So if you know something that someone else doesn't and they ask a question, feel free to pitch in. Don't wait for Greg or me to answer the question if you have the answer. Just like WordPress, the world of WordPress, we would be nothing without our community. And this show is about community as well. So once again, please be respectful. I don't know if I can, reiterate that too many times. If any of these rules are not followed, which hasn't happened yet, Greg and I reserve the right to boot someone from chat if the rules are not followed. And Kevin says hi. Hey, Kevin, how you doing? So with that said, we have a few announcements, and then we're going to get into, this is going to be kind of a fun episode, actually. Today, we're going to talk a bit about some of the questions that we get in customer service. Of course, we're not going to cover all the questions we get, but a lot of the most common ones that come in. As most of you who have dealt with us at all know, Greg handles the lion's share of our customer support questions. So Greg has most of the answers, and he's going to be going over some of these with you, and hopefully we'll have something that helps you. And if not, and you have a question that we don't cover, please feel free to ask it in the chat, and we will try to answer it for you. And hello, Andy. Thank you for joining us. A couple regulars here. So announcements first. In our news for ServerPress, we have a new version that was just uploaded to the repository last night at 5 o'clock. A new version of WP SiteSync is now available on the WordPress repository. It is completely and totally and will always be free. So please go check it out, download it, play with it, love it. Let us know what you think. Give us ideas. Give us suggestions. There are a few enhancements. We updated some serialization issues with the data and serialized data. We improved the handling of empty content. Sometimes there will be some warning messages if you had some empty content. Fixed domain comparison for embedded images. It wasn't finding local images if the site URL was mixed case. We added a fix to remove logging of the target site credentials. We added a fix to address runtime error and serialization parsing. And then a fix/enhancement, improve multi-site activation and fix activation for new sites added to the network. Fixed potential runtime error in licensing code, and fixed runtime errors that can sometimes be displayed if previously pushed content no longer exists on target. So those were the main things that happened in the WP Site Sync with this new release. Recommend that you do the updates. Of course, you probably, if you already have it installed on a site, you'll notice that that it will show you that there's an update available. So go ahead and download that. Let us know what you think. With DesktopServer, we have an update for DSCLI that is coming very soon. We are at the tail end of our testing of it. Things are going well. As mentioned last week, it has the latest release of Node, latest release of Composer, latest WP CLI. So in case we haven't mentioned it before, DSCLI is 100% WP CLI compatible. And then some Git and PHP unit things with it as well. Also, one announcement, which I'm going to repeat from last week, which is that WordCamp Riverside is coming up November 4th and 5th. There are tickets still available. Greg is one of the lead organizers. And how's that going, Greg?
It's going really well. I hope everybody can come out and attend. There's a couple cool things I think that's going to happen. They're trying very hard to get a DeLorean there. This WordCamp is based on the 80s. So they're going to have, I believe, some movie posters around and just all kinds of things themed around the 80s. So there may be a photo op with the DeLorean from Back to the Future.
It also means that all presentations are going to be done on an Apple IIe or a Commodore 64. So that should be fun too. Maybe an Amiga. Let's see. Amiga might have even come out in the 80s, or was that in the 90s? I can't remember. Anyway, so that'll be fun. And then I'm going to be doing a presentation, and I will also be on a speaker panel with the great Steve Zingett, which means I am going to probably keep my mouth shut, which many people will find hard to believe, and listen to Steve talk for the whole panel period, because
Steve is amazing.
He's amazing.
Don't miss that.
Yeah, he's super engaged. If you don't know who Steve is, he runs an agency out in Orange County, and he's one of the most generous, kindest, smartest people I know in the WordPress space, and he's funny too. He's absolutely hilarious. He's got a great sense of humor. And he's extremely humble too, considering he's got all those things going for him. So if you have never seen Steve do a presentation, or you've never engaged with Steve, that alone is going to be worth your price of admission to WordCamp Riverside.
Is that on Sunday, Mark?
You know what? I haven't looked at the schedule. I just go where they tell me to go. So I know for panels, I don't prepare as much as I might for a presentation. For a presentation, I know what day I'm going to speak. Usually I find out a week before. That's when I look. But as far as panels go, you go up and people ask your opinion on things, and it's not hard for me to offer my opinion on things. So I don't do a lot of preparation for panels. So it probably is on Sunday, and it's worth going to Sunday just once again to just listen to Steve and his wisdom, because he's one of the things about Steve is he will tell you that a lot of the wisdom that he's gained has been from his father. And his father sounds like he was a really, really fantastic guy. And so it's like 2 generations of knowledge within one brain. So it's pretty cool.
Just one other funny thing, Mark. There's 2 rooms that this is held in. Besides there's a great big location. The venue is really nice, and there's 2 big rooms, and they named them again because of the 80s thing. It's very funny. One is called Big Hair Bands, and the other one is called John Hughes High.
Wow. Okay, John Hughes. All right, one of my favorite directors. May he rest in peace. But one of my favorite directors, of course, from the '80s. So that's pretty cool. Um, Anyway, we're also going to be sponsoring. So I don't know. You really you have no excuse not to come unless you're like on a different planet or something like that. So come on out and see us at WordCamp Riverside. Last year was a blast, and this year it will probably be just as good, if not better. So with that said,
Let's give them the address. So if you visit
oh, okay.
2018.riverside.wordcamp.org, that's where you can go to get tickets. And tickets are dirt cheap. They're $40, and that includes not only snacks and coffee and lunch both days, and the you also get a T-shirt. And I'm currently, I think one of the days is probably going to be a nice Panera box lunch. And I believe the other day, if we can pull it off, is going to be a taco bar. So
Oh,
that'll be
nice.
there too.
Yeah. And by the way, Greg kind of has a really good insight onto the food at WordCamp Riverside. Why is that, Greg?
Because I'm the organizer for the food. Yep.
You're the food wrangler, so that's right.
I'm the food
So
wrangler.
that's right. So anyway, enough about that stuff. Let's get into the show here. So we're going to get into some common questions that people ask, and I'm going to be asking the questions that we have, and then Greg's going to be answering them and doing some demos. So I'm going to be turning over the screen to Greg here really quick so that you don't have to see the S constantly popping up. And then I am going to start asking the questions. And once again, if we get through the end of these and there are any questions that we didn't answer that you have, feel free to ask. We'll try to answer them. Feel free to stump Greg.
Yeah, it's not that hard.
So let's get into it. So let's start out with the first question, which is very simply, what happens if I can't deploy my site? So you've built your site, right? And it's all done and you're all happy with it and everything. And you think it's going to be like, okay, I'm just going to copy all my files up to the host and everything will be hunky dory. And it doesn't happen that way. What do you do about that?
So I guess there's several little errors that can happen. There can be an XMLRPC error. There can be a 500 error or 502 or 50. So there's all these kind of different things that can happen. And there are two ways that Desktop Server deploys. There is direct deploy and quick deploy. And they're basically the same except for the transportation on how they get up there. Direct deploy uses XMRPC, which is this, it basically takes your site and breaks it into little packages and sends them all up there, reassembles them, and then unzips and put the files in the right place and imports it into the database. The quick deploy uses FTP. So you're basically taking your archive that you've created locally and FTPing it up along with a script. You run the script, it does the same thing, it extracts it, puts all the files in one place and imports the database in. So those are the two methods, and they're two different transportations. So if you were to get an XMLRPC error, we probably would recommend that you do a quick deploy versus a direct deploy. Direct deploy can be kind of simpler in the sense that it's just basically almost a one-click button to make it deploy. But even quick deploy is really easy. It's just you're creating an archive, you're uploading two files, the archive and the quick deploy, and then visiting the quick deploy script and putting the name in it and hitting go. So both of them are very quick and very easy. But that would be the solutions on that sometimes is to use the quick deploy versus the direct deploy to solve a problem. If you still have issues deploying, please don't get frustrated. Definitely reach out to us at support. If you are a premium member, we will do assisted deployments for you, and we do them within 24 to 48 hours. So we're very quick and very prompt. You would just be able to fill out an assisted deployment request form, and we would take care of it, take that off your plate for you. Did I address everything on that, Mark, or did you think
yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things. Greg brought up that assisted deployments we try to do within 24 to 48 hours, which is absolutely true. But what I will also tell you is that they do make it to the front of our queue. So we always treat them as the highest priority because we know that our customers don't get paid until the sites are up most of the time. So those do end up at the front of the queue. Now, sometimes there are some glitches, and a lot of times they're at the host end and not really at our end. So we have to work with hosts and do some things in order to make things work. Sometimes when there are these hosts that are a little bit obscure and they run things, we actually have one host that I know that we deploy to on, I wouldn't say fairly regular basis, but it seems like it happens a couple times a year, where it's this host that's in Africa. And of course, there's bandwidth issues. So having to upload the site and everything sometimes runs you into problems there. And so while we actually do put assisted deployments at the front of the queue as far as that goes, we also say that we start to address it within 24 to 48 hours, but sometimes it takes longer because we have to work with some of these hosts and things like that in order to get it through. But the whole point with the assisted deploy is we are there to help you. We're like your invisible partner when it comes to that to get things done so that you don't have to worry about it if your deployment doesn't work through the other two methods. And the other thing I wanted to mention with the XML RPC is that it is really, really simple, but it can actually sometimes take a little bit longer. It's easier than quick deploy, but it can take a little bit longer sometimes than quick deploy. Wouldn't you say, Greg?
I would agree with that. I would agree. Quick deploy is our default. We do quick deploys almost on whenever we do assisted deployments. We usually do a quick deploy because it is faster.
Well, and
there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and there's another reason for that, which is sometimes you can do 2 or 3 deployments at once with a quick deploy, as opposed to doing with the direct deploy, which is built into Desktop Server. Of course, Desktop Server is then just solely dedicated to the task of deploying that site. So it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. Yeah.
Another little tip: quick deploy it creates a log file. So we can always you can always go in and take a look at the log file and see what happened, make sure that it went all the way through.
Right.
So that's there for them. So there's definitely some benefits there. And I agree with you, Mark. I discovered today that one of the hosts that we deploy to, when the client could not deploy, and at first they thought there was something wrong with Desktop Server. This happens a lot. We kind of get blamed sometimes, which is fine. But when they found out that the issue was really on the host side, they had picked for it to be a WordPress managed site, and the host locks down the FTP or SFTP so that you can't actually upload files to it, which surprised both me and the client. And so we actually had to contact the host and ask them to switch that off, because we couldn't even deploy to the host at all. So just different things can happen. The hosting world is kind of the wild, wild west. There is definitely no standards at this point. Some hosts use cPanel, some hosts use, what's the other one?
Plex or Plex.
Plex.
Not
yes.
Plex. Plex is a media streaming server that all of us don't admit to having in our homes.
Yeah. So there's just a lot of different issues with the hosts, and we understand that. We're definitely ready to help if you run into problems. We're there for you.
Okay. So that covers deployments, I think, pretty well. One other thing I wanted to point out is that if you are doing a manual deployment, the last thing any of us ever want to have to do is to manually upload all the files through SFTP or something like that. Sometimes we have to, but the reason that takes so long is because it's handling each individual WordPress file individually, and as we all know, WordPress has thousands of files just in even their basic installations. So by the time you throw in all the media and everything that you might have, then you really run into it. Can take. I've actually had to do a deployment through FTP, and it's taken like several hours to just upload the files. So that's why we prefer a couple of these other methods, but sometimes those don't work and you have to go the other way. But Greg, especially knows all the tricks in the books for getting deployments done. So if you ever run into an issue, don't put the brain power into it, because that's what we're here for. Having said that, let's move on to the next question. Um, let's talk about third-party antivirus, Greg. What are the advantages and for us especially the disadvantages of running a third-party antivirus on your system? And this mostly applies to Windows users, because most Mac users do not have an antivirus turned on. Some do. I've run into it, but it's rare.
It's rare. So the antivirus that comes with Windows Defender, is actually quite good, and it does not affect Desktop Server. But other ones can. Some of them can be fairly aggressive. Avast and Trend Micro and a few others can be aggressive in the sense that they can actually throw false positives, as there's one of the files could be considered a virus. Or it can definitely, the third-party antiviruses can make your desktop server run slow, because as you're creating sites, it's going through and scanning every single file. And as Mark mentioned, every WordPress site has got a lot of files. So you can imagine the antivirus having to go through and scan each one of those files every time a site gets created, every time a plugin's added, every time a theme's added, all those kinds of things. And then along with that, some antiviruses will actually quarantine certain elements of desktop server, which can cause desktop server to not even function. Files like the preferences file, where it can't write to it, or the hosts file. The hosts file is very important to desktop server and to your local environment. When you type into your address bar the name of the site, it does the resolution and takes you to the appropriate site. Where if it cannot be written to, those are not going to they're not going to get resolved. So when you try to type in the domain name, it would not resolve. So in most cases, if you can, we recommend not to run third-party antiviruses. Again, the Windows Defender is actually quite good. If you do run a third-party antivirus, we might recommend something like ESET's Nod 32. But ones like Avast not only can cause problems for us, but Avast is pretty notorious for slowing down the Windows operating system. And then also, we've had trouble with Norton antivirus too, right, Mark?
Norton, McAfee, even the big ones,
McAfee.
yeah. You know, I mean, and this is me getting into my personal opinion. I think what's happened a lot is these antivirus, they're getting into the whole security thing, and they try to be a one-shot fix for everything. And so as it is, they run fat as it is, and so they take up a lot of resources just to run. You know, and I'm not going to pick on anyone in particular. I've just found that on Windows machines, if you go and you look, you can just, and you can hear, if you're running a mechanical hard drive as opposed to an SSD drive, you can just hear your hard drive constantly churning and churning and churning and churning. And that's because Windows is having to use a swap file for all its processing rather than its memory, because it's devoted so much of its memory to actually running your antivirus. So you do have to be careful with it. And one of the things Greg didn't mention that you can do if you are running some of these antiviruses is don't be afraid to put exclusions in. Put an exclusion in for DesktopServer.exe. Put an exclusion in for the directory where you where you keep all your WordPress files. So if it's in your websites directory under your documents, then put an exclusion in on that directory so that it doesn't get scanned. And those are ways that you can kind of, in a way, have your cake and eat it too, in that you're still getting that third-party antivirus capability, and you're also not having your files real-time scanned 24 hours a day. Plus, once again, if you're running a mechanical hard drive, you know how mechanics work. The more that your drive is running, the shorter its lifespan is going to be. So all the way around, if you know that what you're doing is working with kind of known good code and known good WordPress files, then there's almost no purpose in having that all scanned. And like Greg said, my experience has been that Windows Defender works actually very well as a real-time scanner, and it doesn't create all that unnecessary overhead that some of these others do. Um, did, did you have anything else to add on that, Greg?
No, I think that pretty much covers antiviruses.
Yeah. Okay. And then Dave, of course, Dave Jesh, who is always joining us in chat. Hi, Dave, by the way.
Hey, Dave.
Mentions that yeah, some AV products scan each file when it's open, and all of WordPress files are opened on each page request. So that's true too. Every time that you request a page locally, boom, it's getting scanned. So this is a really great thing if you think, oh man, my desktop server is running really slow and I don't understand why. We have found probably 90 to 95% of the time that that it's an antivirus, a third-party antivirus that's causing the problem. So take a look at that. And even in Windows Defender, put in an exclusion for your websites directory. You might find a little bit of a performance boost there as well. So all right, with that said, let's move on to another question. I get a big orange box that says notice along with an error.
So I went ahead and brought in an old plugin just so that we could show people what the error looks like. And in this case, you can see this one up here saying deprecated. Sometimes it'll say notice. And when people see this, they kind of like, what's going on? Why am I seeing these kind of messages? And why this is produced is because they most likely have debug and trace turned on in Desktop Server. There's a whole series of plugins that are available with Desktop Server, and one of them is debug and trace. And with debug and trace turned on, it's going to have any PHP error displayed. And so to turn that off, you can simply come in, click on
Greg,
debug and trace. Yes.
Greg, can you share your screen so that we can see what you're doing?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was sharing. Thank you so much.
No
Give me
problem.
just a second. There.
I told you we were going to do some demos today.
Yeah, I totally forgot that was you. Okay, so there's the big orange notice. So if you see this kind of thing where it says deprecated or notice, or it might report an error, this is being displayed because you have debug and trace turned on. So don't freak out about it, but you can come into Desktop Server, and if you go to the first option at the top, stop or restart the web and database services and hit next, you'll see a list of the plugins. Usually what happens is somebody might turn on every plugin, and there's some plugins you may not want to turn on. In this case, I would not turn on debug and trace unless you were working in the code and you wanted to see these errors. But to turn it off, just uncheck the box and then hit restart. And that's going to go ahead and restart Desktop Server. And if we come back here, is it done? Not yet.
And by the way, the debug and trace does come in handy. So there are times where you might actually get a fatal error, right?
Yes.
As opposed to a warning or a notice. And you're going to want to see what's causing that fatal error. So you'll also get a big orange box like that, except it'll say fatal error rather than warning or notice. Warnings and notices do not disable your site. They don't keep your site from running properly. It's just a warning. That's all it is. And as you can see, Greg just refreshed the page with the debug and trace turned off, and those warnings went away. But of course, a fatal notice means that something's crashing hard, and you got to figure out what's causing the problem there. And it could be also very deprecated code, or it can be a conflict between theme and plugins, or any, or just bad code, right, Greg?
Correct. And I don't know if we're kind of following down the page on what you're wanting to cover, but you've actually kind of had a nice segue to what do you do if you see these kind of messages and, for example, you're wanting to fix something or you're wanting to troubleshoot, or you've imported a site and you're getting a big fatal error. So if you're getting a big fatal error when you're like importing one of your sites, you can read in the error that what's causing the error, and it'll usually indicate that maybe there's a plugin or a theme. And to do troubleshooting on that, you could go in and turn off all your plugins and see if that resolved the issue, or you can turn off a theme. Or you had mentioned, Mark, we had seen a new plugin called, is it Plugin Detective?
Yeah, Plugin Detective, which is made by our friends Natalie McLeese and Nathan Tyler, two really brilliant people in the Southern California area. And in fact, Nathan has done some work for us in the past. But Plugin Detective is a very cool free plugin that you can get from the repository. It won the Plugin Palooza at WordCamp Orange County this last year.
Yeah.
And Greg is showing it to you right now. And it makes it very easy to determine if you have conflicting plugins by just automatically disabling. The way that you would normally troubleshoot plugins is the way that I have always done is I would disable about half at a time and see if the problem went away. And of course that takes time. Well, Plugin Detective does that, uses that same methodology, but it does it way faster because it's automated. So and it just asks, it'll disable half the plugins. Is it working now? No. It'll
Yes.
disable the next half. Is it working now? Yes. Then it'll look at the ones that it disabled, re-enable them, and try to figure out from those which ones are working. And it's a very cool, it just basically does what we would do manually, but it does it so much faster. I have found that I can find conflicts in plugins within 5 minutes as opposed to the normal 30 to 40 minutes that it might take. So so definitely put it in your quiver of tools to use, because it is definitely worth having. And Dave brings up that if you're getting a white screen, that's a good time to turn on debug and trace to see what the error is, because I wouldn't say 100% of the time, but almost always if you're getting a white screen, it is a PHP error. Correct, Greg?
I think I would agree with that. Does Dave agree with that?
Yeah. I think I don't know. Dave never agrees with me on anything, so so anyway, I have to give him a hard time, even though he's not like physically here to give a hard time. Yeah, Greg. I mean, Dave agrees. So yeah, so it's almost always a PHP error. So when you get that white screen and you're like, "Huh, what's going on here?" Turn on your debug and trace, and it might give you a little bit more of a clue as to what's going on. And granted, there's a lot of information in there, but generally there's one key line that you can like focus in on that'll draw your attention to say, okay, this is where the problem is. So that's why we have debug and trace. That's why we use it. Sometimes you just have to, because sometimes things don't just work, as the saying goes. For instance, my webcam does not just work on my Apple device, I might add. Anyway, enough about that. Okay, this one, let's move on. When I visit my localhost page, I get "it works."
So this happens only on Macs. And if you visit the localhost page and it just has up at the very top, it'll say "it works." That is basically the Mac's own Apache server. Their own web server is running. And essentially, it is blocking desktop server. So when you start up desktop server, it will not be able to start up the Apache server because port 80 is already being used by the Mac. There are some code or some things to type in the terminal to make that stop. And you can either write into me or investigate through Google on how to stop the Apache server, and that will resolve that issue.
Okay, and one, I have nothing to add to that. All right. I'm running the local SSL plugin, which was created by our friend Josh over at An Honest Host. Running it, Firefox says that the page is not private. So you open up Google Chrome and you don't get that error. You open up Safari or you open up Internet Explorer. God help you. Anyway, and everything works fine. But you open up Firefox and all of a sudden you get that the page is not private. You get a not private error. So why is this happening on Firefox and doesn't work on any other web browser?
Firefox is the way they store their keys. They store their keys in their own library versus the others. The others use your operating system's storage, and so those are all showing up automatically. You won't have when you're using the local SSL plugin, all the pages are going to work correctly. So with Firefox, because they use their own, you're going to have to go through a couple of steps. And if you look up on our docs.serverpress.com under the plugins local and using local SSL, you're going to find the directions to do this. It is very easy. You just go over to the three little dashes in the far right, and you're going to jump into Preferences. Then you're going to see a screen that looks like this and go to Privacy and Security. And then you're going to come down to the bottom and you're going to click on View Certificates. It's going to bring you into a list of certificates, and you're going to have an import option, and you're going to import the certificate from there. And that certificate is always going to be located in your in the examp or examp light folder in the DSCLI and in the local SSL folder. And it'll say serverpressca.crt, and you'll just select that and hit OK, and you'll assign it to trust this CA to identify websites, and you're done. Now every site that you visit in Firefox will have the correct certificate.
Okay, this one's a fun one that just came up with the latest release of 3.9.2, and we are there will be a fix for it in 3.9.3, which Steve is working on, and this issue will go away. But if you're on a Windows machine and you've upgraded to 3.9.2, you get you create a site, and all of a sudden you're getting an out of memory error. What's happening there?
We were invited by a company, we were instructed by a company that makes themes, and a client of ours had an issue where they were having trouble with the theme. And we were instructed to add more threads to the httpd.config file. We did that. Unfortunately, there was a secondary ramification, and that is on Windows, people are getting out of memory errors. So we actually are inviting folks to make a change to their http.config file and commenting out this new thread increase. It's at the very bottom of the HTTP config file. And if you comment that out, you will not get any more out of memory errors.
Greg, I'm wondering if you can you show that you're on your Windows machine, right? Yeah, you are. So
yes,
can you show where that file is and where the line is?
Absolutely.
I assume that you've already commented it out on your system.
I have. That's absolutely correct.
Yeah. So
okay, so we're in my, are you able to see my screen just to verify that?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm just going to go to my C drive and to the examp light folder where DesktopServer lives. And then we're going to go into Apache and the CONF folder. And that's where you're going to find the httpd.config file.
We might also just want to add, you're going to want to shut off all your services and close down DesktopServer before you edit this file. Otherwise, just editing the file, it will let you edit the file, but it's not going to take effect until your web services restart. So
thanks for pointing that out, Mark. That's true. Very true. So I'm going to open this in my favorite text editor, in this case, Notepad++. And I'm going to scroll to the very bottom. And right down here, am I in the right file? Interesting, I'm not seeing it here if I'm in the right file. Reopen that up. See, Mark, you put me on the spot with a live thing.
I put you on the spot. Well, look,
I don't.
every single episode has to have a glitch from either one or both of us. I don't have a webcam. Now you have to find a file. So
I'm not seeing it. So what I'm gonna do is actually show a different. I'm gonna show at least what the lines look like. Give me just a moment, and I am gonna.
yeah, I'm wondering if you just took it out rather than commenting it out.
It's possible.
The directory is. I'm gonna put this in the chat window here. This is the file right here.
And these are the 3 lines that we're going to recommend that you comment out so that they look like this.
And as you can see, the way that you comment them out is just with a pound sign.
Yes.
Or you can delete them completely. Anytime I tend to be superstitious, I guess. Anytime I'm messing with some code that someone else wrote or something, I tend to just comment it out, just so I don't have to remember how to go back and change it if I need to. But deleting it will do the same thing, of course. So I see that we have a couple of people. Andy says that he has been getting that error, and then Idaho Freelancer, who, as I recall, likes to think of herself as a complete independent, unique person that nobody thinks like her. But anyway, Andy, we are going to be writing a doc on it, and I'll probably have a video up shortly on how to do it, probably within the next week. Actually, one of the things that I've been poking around with is trying to find that sweet spot so that number will work, so that with this theme developer, it will still work with their product and we won't get the out of memory errors. So that's the ultimate goal. But until then, we will have a doc very shortly up that reflects this. Okay, let's see. Was there anything else you wanted to add to this, Greg?
No, I think that's it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Andy, it may be a little tough, and it's even showing up a little gray on my screen. So, and I'm on a pretty full screen here. So, but it is. I think it's the last 3 lines of that file, isn't it, Greg?
I think so. And if they wanted to search for it, they could type in no spaces, thread stack size, and it should jump right to it.
Yeah. Look for thread stack size, and yeah, it'll jump right to it, and it's at the bottom of the file. So, yes, Andy, I will make it a point to get some docs up on that pretty quickly here. All right. Let's move on to the next thing. If I wanted to create an archive of my live site, so not your local site, but your live site, although you could with your local, but what plugins or services could I use for that?
We support several different products and services for that. Give me just a moment here. I'm going to actually share.
So the point of this is, let's say you have a live site and you want to bring it down to local so you can make some changes. The point of this is to be able to take that live site, archive it, download it, and then import it fairly seamlessly into DesktopServer by just using the import functionality of it.
Yes. And we support several, and there's documentation for each of these. The most popular is probably Duplicator. And then we also support Backup Buddy. We support BackWP Up. We also support Backup WordPress. And then from the services side, we support Infinite WP, Managed WP, and Blog Vault.
Okay.
All of those are supported.
Okay, so that leads to a couple of questions that I have for you. The first is, Duplicator now has 2 different products. They have a Duplicator, which is the free version, and then Duplicator Pro, which is a paid version. Why would someone need to use the Duplicator Pro version? They may even be forced into having to use the Duplicator Pro version versus the free Duplicator plugin.
The Duplicator Pro, the Duplicator Limited version definitely has a limitation of how big the site can be. If the site is bigger than a certain threshold, you've got to move up to the Pro version. There's a bunch of other features with the Pro version, but I don't know them off the top of my head. But one other kind of piece of news about Duplicator Pro, they did make some changes recently where they've changed the name of the WP config file to a different name altogether. And also they've moved the database into a folder where it used to be right at the root. Both these things can cause issues if you're trying to import into Desktop Server and you're using an older version, or you do not have the clean import turned on. If you turn on clean import, the latest version of both Desktop Server and clean import now resolves that, takes care of those two things.
And this is definitely one of the advantages of the design time plugins. It used to be anytime that an outside company would change the format that they did things, we'd actually have to make a complete change to core. But now that we have gone to this model of design time plugins, it's much easier because all we have to do is change that particular functionality as we did with clean import, and boom, we have Duplicator Pro working. So although I think Steve had to add a hook into the core, a hook or something into the core, didn't he, in order for that to work?
I believe he did, yes.
Yeah. So, but for the most part, we don't have to. A lot of times, our fixes come in the form of these plugins rather than having to change the core, which makes our fixes come out much faster than it used to have to be. So that's kind of nice. Another question is, so one service that's really popular is Updraft. How do we handle Updraft?
We currently don't support Updraft, and that's because they don't actually create a true archive. Their backup does not contain WordPress core at all. It just contains several folders, and they break things up into these folders. For example, the plugins are put into a plugins folder. The themes are put into a themes folder, and they actually even have a folder called others that they kind of shove other things into. It's something we plan to actually add to the clean import as a way to go ahead and be able to handle that. And what we would do is kind of rebuild the archive into an archive that we could use, where it would go ahead and contain the core files, and then we would put the plugins and the themes back into the WP content folder. So it's something we're planning to do. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, because Desktop Server, when it does the import, it looks for an index.php file.
It does. It looks for the wconfig file
and the WP config file. And so if those aren't there, because those are inherent to the WordPress core, Desktop Server stops and says, hey, this isn't a valid archive. And so that's what we run into with that, with Updraft, right?
Yes. Now, if Mark and I have also talked about writing or making a little video on how to make the Updraft into a viable archive. It's actually quite simple. So maybe we can do that this next week. We'll put something together, either a document or a video or both, and show how you can go ahead and take your Updraft backup and make it into an archive that will import right into Desktop Server.
Yeah. And of course, their purpose is, Updraft's purpose is they want to back up the data that's important. And of course, WordPress core is so easy to get that, that's not the important stuff. So it's, I can understand their thinking on that. It's just that it doesn't work. That thinking doesn't work with Desktop Server's thinking necessarily, but, we will make it work. So,
yes, we will.
So this is a question we get all the time, and it's kind of one of my favorites because there's no right answer for it. And the question is, who's the best host?
And this almost always gets brought up at meetups too. It's a very common question.
Yeah. And
so it's an opinion. So I guess I'll start with my opinion and you do your opinion.
Okay.
So from opinion based, some of my favorites is one of the one we use for ServerPress is a company called An Honest Host. And they are excellent. They have really good service. They get back to you with questions very promptly. And that company is great. So I highly recommend them. And by the way, if you want to meet the owner, you could come to the Riverside WordCamp. He will be there, and you can ask him any questions you'd like. The other one I like is SiteGround, is quite good. So those are, I think, the two that I'd probably recommend when people ask me. What about you?
I am not as quick to recommend a host. I always fall back, and it may be a little bit of a cop out, but Desktop Server as a product, we've always ServerPress has always prided itself as being server neutral, and of course we have to be, because we want all of our customers to be happy with what they have, but we also have to work with all these hosts. Many of these hosts we have close working relationships with, and so we don't necessarily recommend I don't necessarily recommend any one host over the other. I tend to ask a lot of questions because it depends on what exactly you want. If you're going to be running a site with 100,000 items and it's on WooCommerce or something like that, I'm going to absolutely recommend a different host, or at least a different service, than I might if it's someone who says, hey, I'm a law office and all I really want to do is get my email and have a landing page. So for those people, I say, almost any $5 a month host will do the trick for you for the most part. But then some of these others where it's like your revenue stream is online, you need to go with something a little bit better and spend the extra money. An honest host, like Greg says, first of all, Josh is really awesome. I've already brought up his name because he's helped us. He wrote our SSL, our local SSL plugin. We do have a close working personal relationship with him. So I always recommend him or them, because they're definitely a personalized service. I like to put our money where our mouth is. We focus our company on being customer service oriented. So of course, we're going to pay a little bit of extra money from our own standpoint in order to make sure that we get the customer service that we think we deserve, and we certainly get that with an honest host. So with that said, the other nice thing about us having these personal relationships with these hosts is, going back to the deployment question, sometimes our customers have an issue trying to deal with the host, and the host says, well, it's not us, it's them, and it becomes a he said, she said kind of thing. But since we have close personal relationships with these companies, it's a lot easier for us to, if we need to, pick up the phone, even if it's a big company, and we know people at some of these other levels where we can say, hey, our customer is not really getting the level of service that we think they deserve, and these other people will get involved and we get things done. So, and I'm talking about companies as big as GoDaddy and Bluehost and all these things as well. And I've seen Bluehost as an example, and I know that they kind of have a rough reputation at some, with some people, but I've seen them go above and beyond for people too. So it's but they are more of a mass market kind of Walmart of web hosting. It's not that they're bad, it's just that they serve a specific audience, so or a specific need. So it really kind of depends on what you're asking and where you're going. I'll say that these days, hardware has gotten to the point where it's pretty much really good, and so you don't really run into as many reliability problems. Everybody's going to offer 99.9% uptime, which if you do the math over a period of years, or of a year, 99.9% is still a certain amount of hours of downtime during the year. And so everybody's going to offer it, and everybody's going to meet that because the hardware is good and the software is pretty solid. And with the exception of denial of service attacks and some other things, web servers are going to be up. Some shared hosting, the servers get a little overcrowded. And so now we're starting to see a lot of this kind of serverless hosting kind of thing, but we're going to see where that goes within the WordPress space. That's a whole nother discussion and topic, I think. So that was my long-winded way of saying I don't necessarily recommend anyone over another. Just know what it is that you need, and
Yes.
and then if you can verbalize what your specific need is, it makes it a lot easier for us to maybe recommend a host to you. And of course, I personally like almost any host that our direct deploy works with. So there's that. and so, um, all right, let's move on. We've got a lot of questions that we haven't gotten to yet, and we're already an hour into it. So let's really quickly let's cover this one because it's one that we get a lot. Why is desktop server slow?
I'm going to let you answer that one. Go ahead.
Okay. My experience has been one of two things. Once again, the third-party antivirus, usually on Windows machines, and then the other is sometimes you might have internet latency issues. And even though you're working locally, WordPress and Jetpack, if you're running Jetpack locally, which probably you don't really need to, but if you are running Jetpack locally, or anything like that, these all phone home or they need the internet in order to connect. And so a lot of times if these plugins are trying or themes are trying to phone home and you have a poor internet connection, it's going to slow down your WordPress development locally to a crawl. And it's going to make it, a lot of people like to blame desktop server for that, but it's really not desktop server that's causing that's having the slowness issue. One of the plugins that comes with both limited and premium is the airplane mode plugin. And we've talked about this a couple of times before in some other episodes. What the airplane mode plugin does, it was developed by Andrew Norcross, who liked to do local development and drove himself nuts because it kept going slow. And the airplane mode plugin basically shuts down the connectivity to the internet through WordPress. So with that done, all your WordPress sites no longer phone home because they can't, and all of a sudden you'll see an increase in speed on your local site. So I recommend that if you're not doing anything like downloading more plugins or anything like that into your site, that you turn on airplane mode, because you will notice a performance gain with it. And all you have to do is activate that on the opening screen of your design time plugins when you fire up desktop server. Just activate your airplane mode and then go into the dashboard on your WordPress site, and you can turn on airplane mode in the dashboard. You'll have a little icon at the top in your admin bar for activating airplane mode. So it's really easy to use, really easy to do, and you'll see a performance increase. And those are really the only two things that I've seen that really cause quote unquote desktop server to slow down. I guess the only other thing I would say is if you have an old machine, that could do it too. But most of the time, these are the two things that we found that slow systems down. Let's see. When I visit the local host page, it's blank on Windows.
And that is usually caused by one of two things. It can be caused by a service that Windows runs. Windows, it's their publishing service. I'm blanking on the name all of a sudden. It's basically IIS.
The World Wide Web Publishing Service.
That's it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And if there was a period of time there when there was updates going out for Windows, and that was getting turned on automatically. And if it got turned on automatically and you tried to visit the localhost page, you get a white screen. So all you'd have to do is go into services and turn that off, and then restart desktop server, and the localhost page will come right up. The other thing that can take it is Skype. So once again on Windows, we were seeing this where Skype was using port 80. We're not seeing it so much anymore because Skype has kind of changed the way their connections work. So they're not using port 80 at all anymore.
Yeah, that really was a Windows 8 thing in 8.1 when Skype decided they wanted to do the Skype desktop, I think, where it took up basically your whole screen, and that was a big flop, thank goodness. I just thought it was a bad idea. But yeah, the port 80, it really is anytime port 80 is taken, right? You're going to get that blank.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, but
Blank, or you might get a 404.
right.
Things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's go to unable to locate index PHP when importing a site. What happens when that happens?
Usually, either the archive might not contain an index.php file, or if you're importing into Windows and the file is bigger than 2 gigabytes, that can happen.
And so go ahead.
To resolve, if it's a very large archive, if you're importing a really large site, you could go ahead and unzip it and take the uploads folder out, which is the folder that contains all your media, your photos and your images and anything else, and take that out and rezip it back up and then import it into DesktopServer, and then take and put that uploads folder in manually through the file system.
And then the other thing that I have found, this has only happened on a couple of occasions, but sometimes people have created their archive manually. So they have created this archive and sent it to us and said it's not importing right. And the archive that they created manually, what they did was they put it as, for instance, a zip file within the zip file. So the index.html or the index.php file is not on the top level of that archive. And so it might be a couple directories down, or it might be a zip file within a zip file or something like that. And so the real solution there is, of course, to unzip everything and then zip it all up so that that index file and the directory structure is directly at the top level and on down, as opposed to 2 levels down, etc. And the file being extra large, that only affects Windows users. That does not affect Mac users. Mac users can do larger than 2 gigabyte imports.
Yeah, this is a Windows limitation, not really a
Yes,
desktop server.
correct. Yeah. Right, and yeah, that's an operating system limitation, correct. My websites have a .dev extension, and DesktopServer uses .dev.cc, and of course, .dev is now owned by Google, and they're doing all kinds of things with that domain. So I'm having problems. What do I do about that?
Just upgrade. If you
Okay,
upgrade
there you
to
have
the
it.
latest release 292, it's going to convert those .dev extensions to .dev.cc, and that should take care of the issue. If for some reason they do not convert, definitely contact us at support. We'll take a closer look. 99% of the time, they always convert up to dev.cc, but every once in a while, we do see a situation where you're running 392 and you're still seeing .dev, but it's an easy fix. Just contact support.
Right. Okay, and then a couple other really quick questions, and then do you think we should go on with? We have some WP site sync questions too. Do you want to go on? We're already at, and we haven't even taken any customer questions yet. I
Maybe
don't
we'll
know if
leave
we have any
WP Sitesync for another call,
for another
another time.
week. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, we can do that. So let's get on to these last two that I have for desktop server. Where are my database files?
So the database files, sometimes people think that the database files are with the WordPress files, and they're not. So on Windows, let's see, let me make sure I'm sharing. I am, good. On Windows, your database files are located in the examplite folder. So let me actually go back to the C drive. So go into the examplite folder, and then into MySQL, and then into data. This is where the databases live. So if you're looking to back these up, there's 2 ways. Of course, you could back up your system or back up this folder. And then also DesktopServer now has a plugin called Database Archive that will back these up for you also. On a Mac, it's located in Applications, Examp Files, var. And inside that var folder is all the databases. And same thing, you could use Time Machine or a backup service to back those up, or you could go ahead and use Database Archive to have it do the archives for you.
And having said that, your database files will always be in one of those two places, whether it's a Windows machine or a Mac machine. They will always be in that directory. They'll be in either the examplite directory on Windows or the examp directory under applications on Mac. That does not change with any iteration of or current iteration of desktop server. So that is not changeable. That is always where you'll find them. And the reason that I bring that up is because the next question is, where are my website files?
So by default, we put the WordPress sites in documents websites. And you can see that by when you create a new development website, if you hit next, right there, the site root, it's going to put it where in usually documents websites, and then it's going to put the name of the website. But you can change this. You can put it anywhere that you'd like. And so if you've forgotten where the site root is for a particular site, you could go to the remove, copy, or move, hit next, and it's going to show you the site root folder so that you can see where that particular site is located, those site files.
So, as Greg said, there is a default, but you can change it and put it wherever you like. I, for instance, always put mine on an external drive so that it is not taking up space on my main on my root drive. So you can move that around all you want. Just remember where you did it. And those are all the questions that I have with regards to desktop server. And I think you're right. I think we'll take the WP site sync questions to another week. And so my last question is, of course, to the customers, do you have any questions that were not answered that you would like answered? Now is the time to ask them. And if not, we will wrap this up. We went a little bit long today, but like we say in the email blast, there's really no end time. We just want to make sure that you all get your questions answered. So if there are any questions, feel free to ask. If not, I will, in the meantime, fill up the space by saying, please, if you have not already, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. This show will be made available immediately. Well, as soon as YouTube is done processing, it'll be made available on our channel. And of course, if you select to get notifications, you'll get notified anytime we have new content. We're going to be pushing out videos pretty regularly and some other tutorials to help you with your workflow. And so subscribing will get you those notifications so that you know when it's available. And if you have any suggestions as to what topics you'd like us to cover, or any tips or tricks that you found, we know our software pretty intimately, but we have every once in a while gotten a customer says, "Hey, I use it for this," and we thought, "Man, I never thought of that before. That's a great idea." So if you have come up with anything for our software, with our software that you've found useful, please let us know, and let us know any topics you'd like us to cover. And I don't really see any questions coming in, so I think maybe we answered truly all of the most common customer support questions. Was there anything you wanted to add, Greg?
No, I think we're good. Thanks,
All
everybody.
right. Well, with that said, thank you, everyone. And as soon as I can find the tab in which to exit out of this, I will be going not live anymore. So we'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.